Hello, everyone, and welcome to another review of The Last of Us TV show. Today, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on episode 2. These are just my first impressions, as I am making this video directly after watching the episode for the first time, and that will be how each of these video reviews go. So, my first impressions meaning I may rethink some of my thoughts later, and if I do, I will probably mention them in the next video. If you didn't watch my review of episode 1, you can do so by following the link in the description. And just like last time, I will spend a few minutes on my non-spoilery thoughts before moving into talking about the episode in more detail with spoilers. And I will warn you when that moment comes, just in case you haven't seen the show yet and don't want to be spoiled. All right, let's get right into it, as I really want this episode to be shorter than the first one. So, my overall thoughts for episode 2 without spoilers. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the episode. I think I liked it just as much as the first one. There were some things I didn't like about it, but, they still didn't ruin the show for me yet. I'll talk about that a little bit more detail in a minute. But the episode was super intense throughout, pretty much the entire thing. And I loved that. It had so many vibes from the game. And I have to admit, I had a few fangirly moments. Yeah. We got to learn a lot more about the additional infected lore that they made up just for the show. And it's creepy as heck. It made my skin crawl, and it would have made the game a lot scarier if it had been included back then. The main issue I had with the episode, though, is kind of a big one, at least for me, and one that I mentioned in my review of episode 1, and that is Ellie. Now, I won't go into the details until the spoiler section, but I'm not really liking the way Ellie is portrayed quite so much. Now, I don't think that it's Bella Ramsey's fault, as I think she's a good actress and she does her job well. I think she probably just had poor direction, or else the director wanted something different from what we got in the game, which is actually disappointing to me because Neil Druckmann actually directed this episode. And so I wonder if he's doing this deliberately, like as a way to retcon Ellie, to try to make her tougher maybe? I don't know. I don't think the change is a good one. Ellie is difficult to like in the show because she is so antagonistic and bratty so much of the time. Like I said in episode 1, Ellie from the game can be that way sometimes too, but only when it was truly called for. Ellie in the show doesn't seem to have a reason most of the time. It's just who she is. And if it's hard for me to like her just because of how much of a brat she is, then how in the world is Joel ever going to start liking her? We did get a couple of scenes this time where they tried to show us Ellie's quirky and fun-loving side, but for me it just fell flat because it felt out of character by that point. I'd like to talk about this some more later, though, with specific examples, so stay tuned to the spoiler section if you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts about it. As far as the other characters go, I still love Joel and Tess. I really have nothing negative to say about Tess's character. I think she is spot on. Joel has something going on in this episode that I have questions about, something that isn't in the game, so I'm curious to see where they're going with it, but overall, I thought he was great in this episode and still seems like Joel to me. Overall, I think it was a solid episode with some really awesome scenes straight out of the game and just as intense. I am still very much looking forward to the next episodes, and I'm holding out hope for Ellie still. I really want to like her. I hope the show allows me to soon. And don't get me wrong, you guys, me not really liking the way they're doing Ellie is not ruining it. It's not ruining the whole show for me. It's just a peeve I have about it. But I still really like this show. So, at least for now. I mean, I don't know if Ellie's going to change or not. I hope she does for the better so that we can like her more. But yeah. Anyway, I can't really say more without getting into spoiler territory, so I think I'll begin the spoiler section now. So, you have been warned. Put this in your watch later if you haven't seen the show yet, and come back later, huh? So I'm going to try something a little different from last episode in that I'm going to try to do less scene by scene commentary this time. I didn't even intend for it to be a scene by scene commentary last time. It just ended up being that way because, I don't know, it just did. But chances are, if you're watching the spoiler section, it means that you've seen the show already and you don't need a recap. Plus, it eats up a lot of screen time. Now, if you haven't seen the show and you're watching the spoiler section anyway, I'm sure there's other recap videos you can watch if you need to have that context. So this go round, I am going to just talk about events that stood out to me and themes and topics more than sequence of events. And possibly they will be in no particular order, just as they come to me. Let me know in the comments which version of my commentary you end up liking better. My commentary for episode 1 or episode 2. All right, let's get into it. And since we were already just on the subject of Ellie, I think I will begin this spoiler talk with her because I wanted to elaborate a little bit more about that. Obviously, we get a lot more of Ellie in episode 2 because she's in the entire thing instead of just a quarter of it. And like I said in the non-spoiler section, I just had a hard time liking her very much. I don't hate her. It's not like something like really bad. It's just she annoys me. She feels like a bratty teenager, who thinks she's got something to prove all the time. Sure, like I said before, she had a few moments here and there where she was civil with Joel and even nice with Tess, but they were severely overshadowed by her pervasive, snarky, hostile attitude and eye rolls. Oh, the eye rolls, they're like constant. And it begins right away in the first scene that she's in when she wakes up and Joel and Tess are watching her and they begin to question her. She resists them as much as she can. And there seems to be so much animosity, especially between her and Joel. In the game, this scene, or the equivalent of it, it's not exactly the same in the game, but it has a much different vibe. Ellie willingly answers all their questions and she's not hostile. She acts scared, probably worried what they're going to do with her, but she's not nasty or teen angsty, like she is in the show. True, she does get a bit defensive of Joel's unbelieving attitude, but she's not bratty about it. Her attitude and is different, and in fact, she says the exact same line in the game as she says in the show at one point, but the delivery of those lines, the exact same line, is so different. It's like night and day. The one in the game, she's just upset that Joel doesn't seem to believe her, and in the show, she just sounds bratty about it. And another vibe that's different from the game in this scene is that Joel and Tess are way less trusting of Ellie, holding her at gunpoint, Joel not letting Tess get too close to her. They stay up all night watching her, things like that. They don't act like that in the game, at least not by the time this conversation is happening. But you know what? I'm okay with that. Maybe it even makes sense. Perhaps in the game they were too trusting, given the circumstances. Considering that an infected person can turn in such a short amount of time, and considering what getting bitten by one will do to you, I'd be paranoid too in that situation. I just don't think that their paranoia should bring out such hostility from Ellie, though, because it seems like she would or should understand why they're being like that. And there is also an unrelated thing in this scene in regards to Ellie that I thought I'd mention because it also seemed out of character for her. When Joel says, if she so much as twitches, Ellie immediately begins pretending she's a clicker. And Joel and Tess shut her up real quick, right? Now, I remember seeing that clip in one of the trailers a long time ago, and back then, I didn't like it either, and I thought it was out of character. I don't think Ellie would make light of something like getting infected and turning into a clicker. The show hasn't revealed it yet, but fans of the game know that Ellie wasn't alone when she got bit. She was with her best friend Riley, and Riley was bit too. The game doesn't show us, what happens after that, but chances are high that Ellie watched Riley turn. She may have even been forced to kill her best friend herself, or watch as Fedra did it. You know, the infection and turning into a clicker would not be a joking matter for Ellie. It would be a sobering, gut-wrenching thing to think about. Something she wouldn't wish on anyone. And even all that aside, it seems odd that Ellie in the show would play a prank like that on two trigger-happy strangers who think she can turn on them at any minute. You know, she's lucky they didn't just shoot her right that second. So, I think that the show has lost sight of who Ellie is as a person. You know, at least in the first 2 episodes, which is all I can judge for now. They spend so much time establishing that Ellie is a strong-willed, tough, irreverent, know-it-all brat that when they introduce a scene where she's supposed to be quirky and funny, a scene that's supposed to be endearing, it falls flat and it seems out of character. It should be the other way around, like it is in the game. In the game, Ellie is fun-loving and quirky, but serious when necessary most of the time. And every once in a while, she shows her temper or throws some sass, but only when it's truly called for, when it will make the most impact. But it's her loving, almost naive innocence that draws Joel to care about her. And so far, TV show Ellie has none of that. Which brings me to another point. Something that stuck out to me in a particular moment. And this is a scene that the show shares with the game. That scene on the rooftop overlooking Boston, where Joel and Ellie share a moment as they gaze at the view. The dialogue here is almost word for word identical with the game. But the subtext either isn't there or falls flat. So let me explain that. In the game, by the time we get to this scene, Joel, Ellie, and Tess have spent a long, grueling night fighting and sneaking through all kinds of Fedra scouting parties and infected, saving each other's lives left and right. Ellie has been a willing, cooperative, and fairly pleasant companion through all of it. And so by the time they get to that rooftop to admire the view, Joel is thinking, hey, she's not such a bad kid. He even gives her a smile that heavily implies that she's growing on him, which reminds him of his daughter Sarah, which causes him to glance at his broken watch. And then Tess notices the glance and tells Joel to get a move on. And a few seconds later, she tells him to stay focused. And I don't know about you, but I always got the impression that Tess knows about Sarah. She may be the only person Joel ever told about Sarah, and she noticed that Joel was getting distracted by Ellie and that Ellie was likely reminding him of his own daughter. This is one of the most beloved scenes in the game, and it's the first time that Joel and Ellie seem to have a connection. The first time you can see something deeper going on in Joel. It's an important first step in his character arc, and it feels earned because of everything that came before that moment. Now compare it with the version in the TV show. They spent the entire night sneaking through the city. They had to kill a single guard who stopped them. They did meet a bunch of clickers in the museum, but they spent a great chunk of that time distrusting each other, arguing, and barely tolerating each other's presence. I'm talking about Ellie and Joel here. Tess generally plays good cop most of the time. Joel and Ellie have a conversation where they ask each other questions, but it's laced with so much animosity that it doesn't feel like it helped to improve the situation at all. In fact, Joel is actually the one who initiates the conversation, asking Ellie questions in a friendly way. And Ellie, of course, answers with spiteful snark before, giving in and grudgingly asking questions in return.
Nice knife. Where'd you learn to do that?
The circus. Where are you from?
So different from Ellie in the game, who is curious and friendly and wants to know everything about someone, trying to get Joel to open up and Joel being the one who doesn't want to talk. Anyway, by the time they get to that rooftop in the show, I was getting pretty tired of Ellie's nonstop eye rolling and attitude. And if I were Joel, I'd be tempted to turn around and go back home just to get away from her. And even just as they're arriving to the rooftop, Joel still doesn't trust Ellie at all. He's still convinced that she's going to turn at any moment, and he talks to Tess about this. And that isn't not how Joel was in the game. By this point, he probably doesn't fully believe Ellie's story, but he's not afraid of her anymore. He doesn't think she's going to turn on them at any second. She's just a kid, in a bad situation. Anyway, so then on the rooftop, there's the scene from the game where they share the view. And all the same lines are spoken as in the game. But something that doesn't happen is the feeling that this scene and the character moment that supposedly takes place here was earned because of everything that came before it. Joel has no reason to start liking Ellie at this point. Like I said, he barely trusts her. He doesn't trust her at all, actually. And, Ellie can't possibly remind Joel of his daughter because Sarah wasn't a brat. And I could tell that the show was trying to convey the same vibe in the scene as the game did. I mean, the music heavily implies it. But it just wasn't there because of everything that came before. It just wasn't earned. And it didn't help that Tess didn't even look at Joel as she pushes past on her way to the ladder. So there's no connection or understanding between Joel and Tess about what Joel is thinking and feeling. Joel does look at his watch, but Tess doesn't even see it. And again, it just doesn't feel earned. And this is the biggest issue I have with this series so far. I just wish they'd taken a different approach to Ellie. And I hope that she changes as the season progresses, because I don't know how much more of her I can take, to be honest. She is the reason I am not giving this show a 10. Okay? This show for me stands somewhere between a 7 and an 8, I think. If Ellie was true to the game Ellie, I would give this show a 10 because I like it that much. She is the one thing so far that I do not like. And that's unfortunate because she is like one of the most beloved video game characters of all time. And a lot of people like her more than they like Joel in the game. And so it's really sad that it's not true for the show. Anyways, I know that's a load of negativity right at the start of my review, so, but I wanted to get it out of the way. Anyway, so let's move on now and talk about something more fun, because, yeah, like I said, I don't want you guys to get the impression that I dislike the show, because that is the farthest thing from the truth. There are a few issues with it, but overall, I think it's great. And some parts are downright awesome, so let's talk about those parts, yeah? First of all, let's talk about the infected. I loved the intro sequence where it shows the start of the outbreak and how quickly it got out of control. That scene is laced with dread and horrible things implied there. Bombing an entire city full of your own people just because 15 infected humans are loose out there somewhere. Yeah, I wonder if they actually went through with it. What a horrifying decision to have to make. And I also really like that they're showing us more detail on the outbreak, because none of that is shown in the game, and you're just thrown directly into the action from the point of view of a single person. So it's nice to see some of the lore fleshed out some more. So I wonder if they're going to do sort of this flashback scene to the start of the outbreak at the beginning of every episode. That would be kind of cool to see how it all played out on a more worldwide scale, with other characters that we didn't get to see in the game. That would be cool. And of course, fans of the game know that they changed the infected for the TV show. In episode 1, I talked a little bit about how the infected don't put out spores. And of course, we were introduced to those creepy feeler things that come out of their mouths. I did look it up. after I recorded that episode. And for some reason, the showrunners decided to replace spores with the feelers. They said they just wanted something new for the show. I've seen many people comment, and I agree, that they should have kept the spores and just added the feelers too. And I mentioned in my last video why spores are so important to the story. And I wondered how in the world they would convey these story beats without them. Well, episode 2 showed us how. Apparently, Ellie will just have to keep getting bitten in convenient moments in order to prove her immunity to people when necessary. Yeah. I think it's a much weaker plot device and way too convenient, so I'm not a huge fan of the no spore idea, or of Ellie getting bitten multiple times just to prove that she's immune. Yeah, anyway. But I do like the feelers. I think they're super creepy and gross, and they make sense when you think about all the parts of a fungus. The showrunners said that the feelers were inspired by something that all fungi have. It's called mycelium, which is more or less, I guess, the roots of the fungus, if you can call them that. But they can spread over a great distance, just like how Tess describes in the show. Actual mycelium can spread across thousands of acres sometimes. So technically, a mushroom that you pick in the woods could be connected to a mushroom a mile away. And that is depicted in the show, by how the infected are all joined by these mycelium feeler things that extend throughout the ground. And it's so creepy that just stepping on some of this mycelium, cordyceps, mycelium, whatever, could bring an entire horde down on you. I'd like to know how anyone actually walks around anywhere without that happening. And by the way, that infected horde they saw, super creepy. That wasn't in the game. So that was like, oh yuck. But the fact that they introduced the mycelium this way just gives me another reason to think that it was a bad idea to remove the spores. Because scientifically, you can't have mycelium without spores. You can think of it as the spores as the seed and the mycelium as the root that grows from the seed. You really can't have one without the other. And I know it's just a show and it doesn't have to be perfectly scientific, but if they're going to go to the trouble of creating a new feature of the infected that is based on science, then they shouldn't remove the other feature that is also based on science that the second feature needs in order to even be a thing. Anyway, my absolute favorite part of episode 2 was the sequence in the museum. It was so spot on with the game. I loved it. It was so tense, the build up to that first clicker encounter. The obvious fear on Joel and Tess's faces. You know that this isn't a situation to make light of. And even though both of them are tough, experienced individuals who have killed numerous infected before now, the very thought of going into that museum terrifies them. And I love how the clickers were exactly like in the game, in appearance as well as behavior. It even takes multiple bullets to bring one down unless you hit it right in the face, just like in the game. I think this sequence was perfect, and it definitely saved this episode for me. It helped to overshadow my disappointment in Ellie, because I can just look at that sequence and be like, oh man, that's what it should be right there. Another huge change from the game is what happens when they get to the Firefly rendezvous point at the State House. They find all the Fireflies dead, and in the game, it looks like they were all shot. But in the show, they've been infected, and I guess they all turned on each other. And in both the game and the show, this is where we learn that Tess had been bitten by a clicker in the museum, and she doesn't have much time left, so she insists that Joel take Ellie and leave her behind. In the game, she urges Joel to take Ellie to Tommy, since he used to be a Firefly. But since the show has already established that Tommy is missing, they can't use that plot point anymore, so she tells Joel to take Ellie to Bill and Frank instead. Not sure what Bill and Frank would be able to do for Ellie, but okay. The only reason why Joel goes to Bill and Frank, or Bill, in the game is because he knows that Bill could probably get him a car, and they need a car in order to go find Tommy because Joel needs to take Ellie to Tommy. So I'm not sure if the reasoning makes sense in the show, but whatever, it's a small thing. And maybe it will pan out differently than I'm thinking. So at this point in the game scene at the state house, trucks roll in outside and you can hear shouts from Fedra soldiers closing in, and Joel and Ellie have to leave through the back way, letting Tess stay behind to buy them some time, and she gets shot down. But in the show, it's a huge horde of infected coming instead of Fedra because the cordyceps mycelium in the ground alerted the nearby horde that some fresh victims are in the state house. And Tess's plan is to burn them all up by lighting spilled gasoline. But she can't get her lighter to work, and all the infected come in, and one in particular comes right over to her, and it is so disgusting. I cringe just recalling it, and I can't even put a screenshot of it on the screen. That's as far as I can go, you guys. Yeah. Yeah. He sticks his little feeler things in her mouth and they go down her throat and okay, anyway. I get why they made the changes to the story here. They wanted to establish their new infected lore with the tendrils and the mycelium, and since only 2 characters in the entire story actually get infected, they had to show it through Tess, since the second one with Sam doesn't happen until much later in the story, and it's better to establish things sooner rather than later. It's horrifying, though. Yeah. I'm so glad that Tess didn't go out that way and that she got that lighter to finally work. That's the stuff of nightmares. But the scene with Tess and the infected does annoy me a little bit because it shows the infected acting out of character from what we've seen of them so far. So far, they've been mindless, flailing monsters that only want to bite and chew on their victims' necks. And suddenly, here's one who approaches in a slow, calm, rather seductive way, and instead of biting Tess's neck, he French kisses her. Of course, if he had attacked her, she would have dropped the lighter before getting a flame to start, so they couldn't have that happen. But Tess, there's a dozen grenades lying around the room. Grab one of those and pull the pin, girl. Or at the very least, hide behind one of those huge pillars to buy yourself some time, right? And also, why in the world was this infected dude coming over to her in the first place? She's already infected. Isn't she one of them now? Or are they not considered one of them until their minds are taken over by the fungus? But wouldn't he be able to sense that she was infected and that it was only a matter of time? I don't know. I just think this scene was inconsistent, and they only did it this way for this one moment so that it would be creepy. And we'll never see infected behave this way again. And to me, that's kind of just bad writing. But again, it's only the second episode, so we'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, there was one more big change that the show did from the game, and that was the scene where they went into the hotel. That scene is in the game, but it takes place much later into the story and in Pittsburgh, not in Boston, and Tess is definitely not there by then. And so where we are right now in the game, they actually go into a skyscraper that's slightly leaning and is full of offices. It's not a hotel, and definitely not that hotel. And it's also where they meet the first infected. The hotel scene in the game starts pretty much the way as in the show. It's full of water and they have to wade through it. Ellie goes over to the counter and does her little bellhop play acting thing. But in the game, the hotel scene means a lot more because it comes much later in the story after Joel and Ellie's relationship has progressed to the point where they more or less trust each other, and Joel actually likes Ellie and is starting to care about her. And Ellie is coming to think of Joel as a father figure by then, too. And so that quirky, fun scene is endearing in the game, and even more so in the game than in the show, because Ellie reads a few jokes from a joke book and it eases attention a lot. And in the show, the very same scene is not endearing for the same reasons I already discussed at length about Ellie and her hostile personality. It makes this scene in the hotel feel almost out of character for her. That's what I was thinking when I first watched it. She walked in and started acting playful and, quirky, and I was like, wait a minute, who's this person? Who's this person we're seeing? This isn't Ellie from the show. This is Ellie from the game. They're not the same person, It felt that way to me. But there's more that happens in the hotel that they completely leave out of the show. And, for good reason, because it can't happen just yet. Because they moved the hotel to be a little earlier in the show. And spoilers for when, for a little bit later on in the game, if you haven't played the game, or if you don't want to know what happens in the show later on. I'm only assuming they're going to put the scene, but I'm going to talk a little bit about something that happens much further into the future in the game. Skip to the time index on the screen if you don't want to hear this. In the game, there are hunters living in the hotel, humans who hunt other humans to take their stuff. Joel and Ellie spend a lot of time fighting and or sneaking through the hotel, and at some point, Joel ends up falling down an elevator shaft into the flooded basement, leaving Ellie alone at the top. And after many trials, they are finally reunited just in time for Ellie to save Joel's life from a hunter who's trying to drown him in a pool of water. And she shoots the hunter in the head, and it's a huge moment for her because it's the first time she ever killed a non-infected human. It's a big moment in their relationship, too, because Joel is still mostly in denial about his feelings for Ellie. And when faced with those feelings, he tends to push her away and get defensive, which he does in this scene. Instead of comforting her, he reprimands her for not staying put like he told her to, and for using a gun. And Ellie finally stands up to him, calling him out on his behavior and what he should have said instead. There's a lot of friction between them after that for a long time, until they get out of the hotel and find themselves in a perfect sniper position overlooking a street patrolled by hunters. And it's here that Joel finally allows himself to fully trust Ellie, and he admits that she was right. And he gives her a rifle so she can cover him while he goes down to trying to find a way through. And ever after that, there is a new understanding between them, and their relationship and Joel's character growth advances a great deal. But of course, none of that happens in the hotel sequence in the show, because they put it way too early in the story. And all that to say, I just wonder where they're going to place that scene in the show later on, because I can only assume they're going to include that scene. They've been including all the major plot points so far. I imagine they moved the scene here so they could have the funny moment with Ellie at the hotel counter as a way to kind of show us that she really is just an innocent, playful girl at heart, but it doesn't land at all, at least not for me. And it also served to distract me, actually, as a fan of the game. Since during that scene, when I was watching it the first time, all I could think about was, wait a minute, why did they put the hotel here? This doesn't happen until they get to Pittsburgh. Yeah. So it's not a huge deal in the long run, really. I know I've gone on about it for a minute, and I'm sure that they can put all the important character building stuff in a different building once they get to Pittsburgh. It just annoyed me a little bit, since the whole reason they moved the scene here in the first place failed to induce the emotional response in the viewer that they hoped it would, at least in this viewer. So, I don't know. Seems like they could have added a different scene to show Ellie's quirky side, instead of stealing one from further on in the story and just leave that one where it was. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter in the end. So there was one more minor change, and mostly just a curiosity I wanted to mention. It's about Joel and his apparent PTSD that was triggered when he killed that guard in episode 1. Because a couple of times in this episode, in episode 2, we were reminded of that incident. Joel staring at his bruised hand and clearly troubled. I know I mentioned that he might have a hairline fracture in his knuckle, but so I don't know if that's why he keeps looking at it or if he's being reminded of what he did. And Ellie asked him about the guy he killed because, like, he didn't just kill the guy. He he was in a rage all over this guy. And then Joel not wanting to discuss it. So I'm curious where they're going with this plot point. Is Joel upset over killing the guard, or is he upset because of the flashback to the night Sarah died? I don't imagine that Joel would care about killing a guard, especially in self-defense, even one that he knew personally. So it really must be the PTSD then. And this is something that Joel in the game doesn't have, or if he does have it, we don't really see it manifest ever. So yeah, I'm curious to see where they take this. So not a complaint or anything, just a curiosity. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. I'd like to know what you guys think. Anyway, I'm about to wrap up my review, but I wanted to end it on a more positive note, because there's kind of been a lot of negativity in this. Anyway, just a couple more things that I loved. I loved the feel of Boston. All the abandoned and falling down buildings, and that shot where they're walking on that overpass was really cool, and hearing the clickers down below. This city felt so desolate and dangerous. They did a really great job with all of it, and the visual effects, the visuals for that, it looks good. I think it looks good. So I really enjoyed all of that, the sequence of them just walking through the city and just seeing the desolation. And I liked that they put in one of the classic teamwork obstacle climbing sequences from the game into the show. A wall of rubble blocks the way. Joel helps Tess over the top of it so she can open the door from the other side. Anyone who's played the game is quite familiar with moments like that. So I thought it was a nice homage to the game that they could have easily ignored. It's just a little game mechanic that they put in real life, so that was fun. And I loved this little frog on the piano. So I'd love to know what you guys loved about this episode. What did you not like about it? What do you think of Ellie's character? And what do you think of the changes they've made to the infected? So leave me comments down below. I look forward to discussing it with you there. And that is going to wrap up this review so far. Let me know what you think of this format. I didn't talk about every single little change. And like I did last time, I just focused on the ones that mattered the most to me. I had some other little tiny nitpicks here and there, but they really aren't worth mentioning. So I just thought I wouldn't. To save time, these videos are really kind of time consuming to edit and put together, and I want to get them out in a timely manner. So keeping them shorter is definitely going to make that easier job for me to do. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it. I will see you again in the next episode. And until then, remember to play safe, play nice, and have fun. Bye, guys.